Previously on the Ivory Tower Boiler Rooms, Part 1 exclusive interview with Dr. Tim Dean. I don't know if you know Zachary Zane's work, but he wrote this book called Boy Slut, which is just so fascinating about being a bi male and all of the sex parties he goes on as an investigative journalist. And he was on the podcast. It was just I love the work he's doing, but it's a popular press, Tim. Like, I think that even at the library, I'm seeing more of these risky, when I'm using risky, I mean taking chances of like that publishers are taking chances in a whether it be, I think his is Abrams, but I've seen so many different Harper has taken a lot of sexual culture discussions on. Do you think Verso Books too with Bad Gays, is this just a disconnect between academia and pop culture right now? Because I do feel pop culture is taking the nude male body is having almost a rebirth of sorts.
I love that idea. I love the idea of the nude male body kind of being reborn and being newly displayed to us. It's all good. And I was not aware that Playgirl was having a resurgence. So that's interesting to learn about. I mean, I have several thoughts in response to what you said. One is,
Want to listen to this Ivory Tower Boiler Room or True Crime and Academia episode ad-free? Head on over to our Patreon, patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room, to listen to all of our podcast episodes without any ads. You get access to our video episodes, our bonus episodes, and even more exclusive content, including merchandise. It only starts at $5 a month, so head on over to our Patreon. Again, it's patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. And while you're at it, you know what would be such a help is if you could rate and review the Ivory Tower Boiler Room on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And make sure that you follow us and share out our podcast to all of your friends. It truly does help. And I want to thank you all. It means so much that you're listening to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. I hope that you enjoy this episode. Hi, everyone. This is Andrew, and I am interrupting what I know is such an exciting Ivory Tower Boiler Room episode to tell you all about one of my favorite podcasts. It's called That Old Gay Classic Cinema, and it's hosted by Christian Garcia. Christian is joined with guest co hosts to talk about classic cinema films that we know and love, and he analyzes them through a queer lens. So he's talked about The Sound of Music, Alfred Hitchcock, The Wizard of Oz, Sleeping Beauty, 101 Dalmatians, and recently Hello, Dolly. I actually was on his first ever episode to talk about my love of The Sound of Music and playing Captain Von Trapp in my high school musical. Then I was joined with Mary DePippi, the host of True Crime and Academia, and our friend Travis Roundtree to talk about Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo. Mary just had Christian on True Crime and Academia to talk about female poisoners, including the evil queen from Snow White and actual real life female poisoners. So, Christian's podcast is the best. You must add it to your listen list. After you listen to this episode, make sure you head over to That Old Gay Classic Cinema on Apple and Spotify. Make sure you follow him on Instagram at That Old Gay Classic Cinema. And he's also on TikTok. Don't forget TikTok. Okay, I can't wait for you all to listen to That Old Gay Classic Cinema. And now, back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room.
libraries have always had more pornography than we realize, and in fact, than libraries themselves often realize. And when I was, when my students and I were working on the Porn Archives project, and we had a conference, and we did a seminar, a graduate seminar, and we did a lot of work, and we were thinking about the way that pornography in a way is a library classification, right? To an extent, right? And I was having dinner downtown I was having lunch downtown in Buffalo and doing some kind of public humanities work. And I ended up meeting with a woman who worked at the, not the university library, but the central library in Buffalo. And she asked me what I was working on, and I couldn't help it. I just started talking about pornography, and she clearly was not thrilled about that. And libraries have a sort of parallel classification system for their pornography. And I said, I bet your library has porn. And her response was clearly like, with the Buffalo Public Library, we don't have pornography. And then she wrote to me a couple of days later. She's like, you were right. She's like, this library has collected magazines like Playboy since they began. She said, it's all here. She said, I had no idea. And she'd worked at the library for years, right? So this is a way of saying that, yeah, even at the library, it's always been at the library, right? It's always been at the library. And there's an interesting history that David Squires writes about the intersection of um, information technology, libraries, and pornography. There's a long history there. Um, what else? What else? I need to look up the voice slut. It sounds like the kind of thing that I would enjoy. I'm keen to read it. Um, I do think that academia and the fields of gender, queer, sexuality studies are all plagued by a kind of, you know, um, defensiveness about a need to maintain their institutional or improve their institutional status by being somehow respectable, right?
Mm.
And there is always this the drive for institutional credibility goes along with a kind of a desexualization and what you earlier referred to as a kind of sanitization of the work. Um, and I think that is a kind of perennial problem, which popular culture does not have the same problem, right? Does not have the same issue, right? They're not necessarily trying to be respectable. They have a different issue. They're trying to make money, right?
That's true.
Um, so I do think that, and um, it's been interesting to me just on sites like YouTube to see how many men are who are not necessarily gay or gay identified or even queer identified are never happier than when they are displaying their muscles and their
Oh yeah.
essentially naked body to as many people as possible. And they are they are perfectly happy that men look at their bodies as well as women. And that, I think, is a relatively new thing, not
Yeah,
just
and it's
gay.
fueled sorry, I was gonna say, and
No,
it's
go ahead.
fueled by social media. I mean,
Right,
there's
right.
so much that needs to be done on this younger male generation, even those who are in 30s, 40s who are on social media, but on TikTok especially, that straight identified men are touching each other. And they're like, the gym culture has now become literally the site of the gymnos. I've been joking that I should write a book called Gymnos Means Nude. And I've always wanted to do a type of, I will eventually, but um, like do a um queer exploration of the gym and the body, because you're right, there's so much that cruising is so present, but it's also what's at the core of the gymnasium since it was founded is
Right.
how the body is shown. But you're right. Straight men are now drawing attention to their bulges and like their body. And that's why I'm saying I think there is something happening. But even You don't, not that I want to put you on the spot to give me feedback for my, dissertation turning into a book eventually, which it will. But I have this whole idea of like, when you come into play with your work on Whitman, like also I really turn to Mark Doty and his work, but about I have this coining this idea of queer male procreative poetics, which is that the eroticism of Whitman's work, it creates this lineage of queer men reading and then responding. And like I interpret it as this new way of procreating. Um, but it was interesting to me that the feedback that I got um asked because I'm so insistent on how Whitman turns to the ancient Greek is subverting the idea of the symposium and um queer male Greek mythology. And the question that I knew was going to come up, but it was, it's always fruitful to think through debates to your work, like you've brought up, is, well, can women be part of this queer male procreative poetics? And what I am going to think through is that women are creating male homoerotic spaces as thinkers. But yeah, the absence of women is something that was brought to my attention, and I knew that it would be there, and I do open up about it in my work. But it's something that I'm sure you've had to really think through is what you're kind of getting at with respectability politics in academia. I also wonder in terms of identity politics. Like we can't when you're talking about the queer male body, I feel like when it becomes about queer men, um, there's always going to be the question of, okay, but what about women? And I'm not saying that that's not that you shouldn't ask that question, but I do wonder, like, has that been brought to your attention in your work?
Yes, yes, it has. It has. It has. For all the same reasons they would be brought to, raises a question for you. And I have a lot of thoughts about it. It was a question when I before I published the book on before I published on Unlimited Intimacy, I gave a lot of lectures on the subject, and people would periodically ask, can women be part of the subculture, right? And even online, on bareback forums, occasionally somebody who was claiming to be a woman would ask, can I be part of this? And it's, it's an interesting question, right? It's a question about why why do why do women feel, and why do feminists feel it's a feminist question to say this is about desire between men. What about me? Can I be part of it? Right? And there's something, one expects it, one understands that it's partly it's driven by feminism, it's driven by ideas about inclusivity, which are incredibly important. At the same time as, if you reverse the scenario and you're talking about a lesbian or a women only space, if a man asks, can I be part of this? And of course, in lesbian porn, straight men like nothing more than to get involved, right? But we have appropriate skepticism about that desire for, in a single sex space, for another gender to get involved. And I think it's worth pushing back against that automatic question, what about women? Because you're talking about desire between and among men, and there is always something potentially heteronormalizing about saying, so where are the women, right? Where are the women in this tradition? Where are the women in this poetic? I've forgotten your phrase. The procreative queer
Queer
male.
male procreativeness.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Um, I think there's something worth holding on to about the male specificity of that, Um, and I don't think that that means that it's excluding women any more than I think, lesbian desire is about excluding men,
Hmm.
or, women-only feminist spaces are about excluding men. I think that's defining those things in terms of what they don't include, and I don't think that that's what motivates them. I think they're about something else, which is much more interesting. But we have become obsessed with what is being excluded here, as if every gender needs to be included at every moment in every practice. And I think that there's something problematic about that. Um, so um, so that's one thing I would say.
Yeah,
You
well, oh no.
go ahead.
Uh, oh no, I was just going to say I'm so glad you're saying this, Tim, because it helps. Like I knew, okay, this is what I'm arguing, but when I've attended straight colleagues, like seeing their work, I've in the back of my head, I've always thought, oh, what about queer representation? But that question usually doesn't get asked. I'm like, well, why aren't you asking them about queer people? Like it does grate my nerves. It's something that, um, like you've said, if we're framing that as a feminist question, isn't the subversiveness that men are engaging in sex together, like that is against the norm. And
Right,
it's
right.
kind of like right now, I'm hearing that male only spaces, like the Belvedere is, which there aren't a lot of queer male only spaces. Um, there is a lot of integration with the LGBT community, especially now on Fire Island. But this male only space has empowered, allows you to network with those you would not get to feel a comfort level with. And now they're being questioned. Like I've seen news, not the Belvedere, but I've seen another space of, well, wait, and queer women now enter the male only space. And I'm like, wait, would that be asked of, like you said, queer female space? Like, would you allow men now to enter? And yeah, it's a difficult question, but like you've said, I think
I
it's
mean,
important that
it's
we keep the queer maleness. Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Andrew Rimby, and I'm so excited to be talking about Broadview Press. You might be asking, what is Broadview Press, Andrew? Broadview is an independent academic publisher in the humanities that produces high quality, pedagogically useful books for use in university and college classrooms. They publish in the humanities, mainly English studies, writing, philosophy, and history, just to name a few genres. And recently, I had on Dr. Jason Holt, who wrote all about the philosophy of sport. And what better summer episode than to talk about what happens when a philosopher dissects the beautiful aesthetics of sporting culture? In the spring, I had on doctors Kyle Stedman and Tanya Rodriguez to talk about what is sound writing, how to make audio projects in the college classroom, how to even have your students create podcasts. And then in the winter, I had on Dr. Jeffrey Weinstock. He talked about analyzing pop culture. Yes, I even sneak in some Real Housewives questions and how to teach composition and make it fun. He uses this whole metaphor about being a mad scientist in this gothic lab. And in the fall, I had on Dr. Ann Stevens, and she talked about literary theory and criticism. And yes, the university season is upon us. So, what better way to talk about the college classroom than to actually understand what is literary theory? That's a wonderful episode for all of you out there who teach literary studies. I love Broadview Press. Make sure you use their exclusive code. It's Ivory Tower on broadviewpress.com. You get 20% off all, all Broadview Press publications. Okay, until the next Broadview Press interview. And now back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Hi, this is Andrew, and I'm interrupting what I know is an exciting ITBR episode to talk to you about one of our sponsors, the Gay and Lesbian Review. Discover new things about gay and lesbian literature, history, and culture with a subscription to the Gay and Lesbian Review, a bi monthly magazine of history, culture, and politics that publishes essays in a wide range of disciplines, as well as a slew of reviews of books, plays, and movies and a number of special features, such as artist profiles and our popular art memo column. Each issue of the Gay and Lesbian Review brings you consistently intelligent, lively, thought provoking articles focused on a unifying theme, and it brings together the leading minds on the topic. You won't find a lot about the latest dating fads or fashion trends, but you will definitely find articles about online dating, like using Grindr as a social phenomenon, or even the gay influence on 20th century fashion. Did you know that I've actually interviewed 3 gay and lesbian review contributors? Make sure you listen to my Ignacio Darnad Breaking the Gay Code in Art episode, where Ignacio explains that key artistic figures like Michelangelo, Donatello, Thomas Eakins, J.C. Leyendecker, and Thomas Finland all have really explicit homoerotic artwork. And then head on over to the next episode where I talk with Dr. Vernon Rosario about LGBTQ psychiatry and how homosexuality got depathologized. And our most recent episode was with the Gay and Lesbian Review's literary editor, Martha E. Stone, and she talks about what LGBTQ literature you should be reading this summer and also how to become a contributing writer and a reviewer for the Gay and Lesbian Review. To subscribe, visit glreview.org. That's glreview.org. Click subscribe and enter the promo code ITBR to receive a free copy with any print or digital subscription. And as an added bonus, you also receive online access to all of the Gay and Lesbian Review's archived issues. All of them. Okay, enjoy your reading, everyone.
That is, it's important that we think about these kinds of spaces in terms, not only under the rubric of inclusivity, right? That is, there is something about desire, and especially same-sex desire, where if you start thinking in terms of gender inclusivity, you're kind of overriding the point, right?
Mm.
Um, that is that is a liberal, progressive, left-wing value of inclusivity is being used to actually stamp out something that is underground, minoritized, um, subterranean, difficult to achieve. And when I presented on campus here a few years ago the piece I had written about public sex in Key West, performing the penis in Key West, right? And I showed an image in describing the architectural layout of this particular space. I showed the door at the back of a bar, which says something like, I don't know if it says clothing optional, but it says men only beyond this point, right? And it is a clothing optional area of this resort space. And one of my feminist colleagues said, and again, it was a kind of frank comment, and she's a friend of mine, and I appreciated her frankness. She said, when you showed that image of the door saying men only beyond this point, she had a very strong reaction to it. Like, why can't I go in? Why is this excluding me? But I think she was also able to reflect, this is not a corporate boardroom, right? This is not a place of power where men make decisions the women are being excluded from. This is a space of desire where many men are wandering around naked, and in order to, in this, not in this quite small space, there is the desire to um, preserve the male only dimension of it because it's about erotic desire, and um, it's not about what her reaction is about. It's not about excluding women from positions of power or devaluing women. It's about the what becomes possible erotically, sexually, when it's all male only bodies together, diverse though those bodies usually are, right? That is, in terms of size, shape, color, ethnicity, background, etc. Right? That there's still, it's
Hmm.
not actually a homogeneous space at all. Um, and so anyway, I write about that, but your question reminds me of that moment and a kind of misunderstanding about what those male only spaces are about. And one has to, one has to push back against the feminist desire to penetrate those spaces. Those spaces are not for you, they're not about you, something else is going on. um, the desire to penetrate those spaces is what should be questioned. That would be a
Yeah.
stronger way. That would be a stronger way to put it.
Yeah. Well, and I promise just 10 more minutes. Is that
Sure,
okay, Tim?
sure.
Okay. This is just so fascinating because Manuel Betancourt, whose episode is going to come out after yours, he wrote this new book called The Male Gazed. I'm not sure if you know of it, but again, it's more for the academic intersection with popular press, right? Like it's kind of
Sure.
how I hope my work lands in a library, but is also used in academic research. That he gives us language for the queer male gaze, which for the longest time, I absolutely love Laura Mulvey's The Male Gaze essay. And I think Linda Williams wouldn't have done her
Right.
porn work without Laura Mulvey and the male gaze because it's so important to straight pornography.
Sure.
But I will say, I don't think we have a lot of manuals offering he's offering language, but I've always said we need queer male gaze language. Like that's where I think psychoanalysis, like Leo Bersani, starts to come into my forefront because a queer male gaze is not the same as the straight male gaze. And like queer male misogyny doesn't operate in the same way that straight male misogyny does. And I
That's
think
right.
maybe that's at the heart of this clothing optional debate or these spaces. Like, yes, there are queer men who can be misogynist. I'm not saying they're not. Um, and there are straight men who are amazing LGBT allies. Um, so I just think though, like what you're saying is we don't have to fit everything under an umbrella. Like, you know, what you do with unlimited intimacy is you're exploring how men are engaging in barebacking. And I mean, even before I hit down to record with you, I got my Descovy prescription
Mm.
today, and I've been on prep for now, I don't know, since the pandemic, before the pandemic, I think. And like, I do wonder, I'm sure you get asked this a lot, but if you return to unlimited intimacy now, like with prep, with now the viral risk being lowered, do you still it does seem like we're now entering into a different way of queer men engaging in sex. Like, how
I
do
think
you
that's right.
process that?
I think that's right. I think that's absolutely right. I think the subculture that I was trying to describe in that book had already shifted by the time the book came out, right? And I think the prep and the various iterations of prep over the last decade have really changed things, right? That is, um, the viral risk is just different, right?
Mhm.
And I've written about prep, um, both, I've written this essay called Mediated Intimacies. I think that's what it's called. 10 years ago about prep, and I just written something about prep literature too, which I think is a new chapter in the history of AIDS literature. So I do think things have changed. What I think, what may have stayed constant is, um, and this is something that I people didn't always grasp about unlimited intimacy, is, viral risk is one kind of risk that goes on in bareback sex, but it's not the only kind of risk, right? And
Mhm.
what I was ultimately interested in is the kinds of emotional and psychical risks the various kinds of sex entail. Sex with strangers, sex in groups, impersonal sex, communal sex, right? The kind of sex where you may not know the people you are having sex with. Um, and if you're looking at this question epidemiologically, which much of the discourse on barebacking was doing, you're only thinking about one particular dimension of risk, which is about viral transmission, right? I wanted to think about that, but also say there are other kinds of risks that come with abandoning protection, right? Abandoning protection and abandoning oneself to others. And it's those kinds of psychical risks and how one thinks about those psychoanalytically, philosophically, what the ethics are of abandoning oneself to the other. That's sort of what I was sort of very interested in the final chapter of the book. And I don't think those risks have gone away because you can get your prescription for Descovy, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Right? That is the what it means to be intimate with another person always involves risk, and it's an illusion, it's a myth, it's a very dangerous and damaging myth that one can absolutely protect oneself from those risks. And what interested me ethically about bareback subculture in the end of the 90s, start of 2000s, was that it was a group of men, some of whom were extremely articulate about the kind of risk they wanted in order to have the kind of intimacy they wanted, right? That um, the closeness, even with, and maybe especially with people you don't know, involves a kind of abandonment, and therefore of oneself, and therefore involves, a risk which really intensifies the interaction, right? And that's the point of it. The point is not to protect oneself from it. The point is to abandon oneself to it. And I think that desire, that impulse for that kind of risk and that kind of intimacy and that kind of closeness has not gone away and will not go away. But our culture is not very good at talking about it or even recognizing it.
Yeah, well, here is the memoir ending that I think will definitely the audience has been waiting for. But I mean, I'll open up right now to you, Tim, which is even at on Fire Island, what I've witnessed is like when I've had sexual experiences, there's something that happens after the sexual moment where you become like you've had sexual intimacy, but now there's philosophical intimacy. I'm like, wait, how are we now into this intellectual conversation after sex? Like it is like that's a moment of like you've become more open because your bodies have come in contact. And
Right.
yeah, it is an ethical question of did you need to have that sexual intimacy? Did that person need that to then become more vulnerable intellectually? But
Hey, Ivory Tower Boiler Room listeners and true crime friends. You've heard me gush over this incredible woman and her beautiful products. I'm talking about Mandy Made It. Mandy makes customized and original crochet and pre-cut goods. They are the perfect, unique, one of a kind gift for literally anyone in your life. And she makes incredible home decor. I still have my pumpkins that I put out every fall. I just love them. Check her out on Instagram at MANDEE Made It, or search Mandy Made It on Facebook. To order, just slide into her DMs, and if you mention the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, you will receive a free personalized gift with your first order. So, go on Instagram and look up at Mandy Made It, and Mandy is spelled MANDEE. Again, her handle is at Mandy Made It, Mandy spelled MANDEE, and order today.
LGBT stories are universal, but each one speaks to the individual heart and soul of the writer telling it. Do you have a story to tell? Or have you been moved recently by an LGBT book, film, painting, television show, or other form of media? Then the Gay and Lesbian Review wants to hear from you. The GNLR believes in bringing awareness to queer art and artists through reviews, commentary, and thought pieces in which the author relates their personal lives to a particular piece of art, a novel, a movie, or what have you. In addition to the print magazine, the GNLR also publishes articles on its blog as well as personal essays on its popular Here's My Story section on glreview.org. That's glreview.org. To learn more about submitting an article for the GNLR, visit their writer's guidelines. The link is located at the bottom of the homepage. And if you have any questions, email publisher Stephen Hemrick. That's STEPHEN.HEMRICK at glreview.org. The GNLR and its readers can't wait to see what you have to say. I also with Grinder, there's so many aspects. Like now, maybe because of prep, I'm not sure, but I've seen that there's more straight male curiosity. There's the man who doesn't show his face and he has a wedding ring, which it becomes an ethical dilemma. But yes, like this is why the work you do, and that whether they be queer theorists or sex theorists, any of the work that's being published is fascinating. But I would like, if you could, in our final moments, to respond to Ramsey Fawaz, who's been on the show.
Yeah,
He,
yeah, I'd
he
be
brings
delighted
up,
to.
yes, he brings up a topic I am sure that you've heard asked of unlimited intimacy, and it has to do more with your auto theory or memoirist style
Mm.
of uh, queer men and just the men in your circle. So, I'm going to play it for the audience, but I'm also now going to play it for Tim so he can hear what Ramsey asks.
I love Tim Dean's work. I think he's brilliant. I think Unlimited Intimacy was like a major game change for me in terms of the way I think. I think part of my frustration with Dean's criticism of the field is that he doesn't acknowledge enough, at least from what I've read, that for a lot of young queer studies scholars living in this environment around like questions of sexual consent, questions of boundaries, if you're a graduate student, to go study actual sex cultures and to participate in them potentially could be very dangerous to you, right? Like you could get in trouble. You could have students that turn on you. In the academic job market, people are getting a lot of jobs at smaller universities in conservative parts of the country. I think it would be very difficult to be a young queer theorist who's like, I'm going to talk about my own sex practices, right? Like Tim Dean, as a very established scholar in Unlimited Intimacy, is able to talk about himself having bareback sex, right? Like that's unbelievable. Like it works really well in the context of that book. That is a very risky thing, right? And I'm not talking about sexual risk. I'm talking about professionally risky, and it pays off for him.
Well, don't worry. I'm going to ask him about this. So.
Right? Like it pays off for him because the book is so brilliantly done, and he's able to bring kind of autoethnography, right? Like writing about his own experiences into it. I don't think most people know how to do that. I don't think most people or have like that's something you achieve.
But yeah, he goes on to say, like as a tenured scholar, you're able to talk about bareback sex and also your sexual exploits that if you weren't tenured or even like say it was for a dissertation, um, that it would be too risky. Like that wouldn't get past a dissertation defense or be published. Yeah. So how would you respond to
Right.
that
Well,
claim?
I didn't fully hear, I couldn't hear the full thing of what Ramsey was saying. My impression is that he is himself now a tenured scholar, right?
Yes.
So he may be young, but he too has tenure. Um, I I began working on unlimited intimacy. It's a book I researched and wrote essentially during my 30s, right? And when I was in my 30s, I think I I think I was young. I had just got tenure, but I was not established in the way that I may look like I'm established now, right? I finished that book, I finished the manuscript in 2005, and it took 4 years to get published, right? So, and I wrote it between, I don't know, like 1999 and 2005, something like that. Which is what? How many years ago is that? I was still in my 30s, right?
Mhm.
So I was not actually as old and quote unquote established as I am today. Um, it can look like that from the perspective of somebody who is a different generation. I totally get that. I mean, one thing for me to say was that um, I was very inspired by Samuel Delaney's book, Times Square Red, Times
Mm.
Square Blue. Came out in 1999, what he was able to do in that book, and his insistence that it's it's crucial not to simply interpret what we say, but to say what we do. And it seemed very, very important to me to do that, not to sort of not to advertise my sexual exploits, such as they were, but to be sort of open and honest about my relationship to this subculture and writing about it because I'm also part of it. That is, I am sort of almost unwittingly part of it, and I want to understand what's going on. I do think that I would not have written that book probably before tenure, right? It's very much a post tenure book. Um, I also think in the way that Delaney's work, Bassani's work have been so important for me. The scholars and writers who go before us actually prepare the grounds for the kind of work that we want to do. So I do think that Ramsey, who now has tenure, no matter how young he is, can now do this because others have done it before him. You know, I think for you, as somebody who does not yet have a tenure stream job, as far as I know, Sunny does not have tenure, just got your PhD. You know, you have to be aware of, you have to be savvy about what is going to get you the kind of job and the kind of career that you want, right? What you describe about what you would like to write about, I think it sounds great, and I think that I think all scholars should be writing about what interests them, what they care about, what they're passionate about. And, I think that people, when you write about what you are passionate about, what you really care about, I think people appreciate that. Everybody appreciates that because they see that there's a kind of genuineness to it, which is not strategic, but which is genuine. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that's an adequate response to what Ramsey said on your show, but
Yeah,
I
no.
admire and respect his work, and I'm glad that he's engaging with mine.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it just these um like thank you for responding to like what Ramsey's concern is about. And I think like you said, it's so much concern about in academia, which already has so many limited positions now, very limited. I can tell everyone because I'm on the job market. But I knew that going in anyway, which is why I'm looking into media positions and hey, maybe even working for Playgirl as an editor, who knows? Um, but I've always wanted to write. I always say, write the book that you would want to be out there. So, like my dissertation, I'm proud of how subversive it is and how it mixes so many methods and is very erotic about Whitman's language. But it's also why there's I do argue against biographical readings that read Whitman as gay. I mean, first, I have to say I love Gary Schmidgall's Walt Whitman: A Gay Life. I know Gary. Um, I wouldn't have been able to think through Whitman without Gary's work. But I'm not talking about Gary's work. I'm talking about like just those who will reference Whitman as gay, and there's no like deep dive into his work. And sometimes it kind of reminds me about that question around Tim, like us circling now back and ending with token queer theory, that it sometimes when an author's sexuality has to be referenced, I don't find that fascinating. I find that then they move on to other aspects that really actually does a heteronormative straight attempt at looking at the work, even though they thought Whitman is gay. Like it collapses everything, and it doesn't make the body erotic. It doesn't make his poetry erotic. It just allows other aspects of his work to be centered, even though there's so much sensuality. And maybe that's how I feel also about the you've had me think now, Tim, with your response of like how I'm putting myself out there. I wouldn't want it any other way. I mean, this is what I'm passionate about. So like why am I going to censor my work?
Right,
It's
right, right. I mean, the worst censor of your work is always oneself, right?
mm,
And uh, I think that I like your approach. I like your thinking broadly about the kind of work that you can do to, if you want to live in Manhattan, you have to make a living, right? You need to be able to pay the bills because you will the bills will be high, right? Um, and I think thinking about what you're training as a reader, critic, thinker, teacher, intellectual, young man or a queer young man of your generation, what you can do from that background, I think is exactly the right approach. I think it's exactly the right approach. And one of the things I was really looking forward to and have enjoyed about talking with you is it's really, it's really interesting to me as somebody, I'm 58 years old. I've been around the block a few times, right? And I've been in this business for a long time now. And it's really interesting to me to talk to and gain the perspectives of, guys of your generation. And I think it's important for the younger generations to read and take seriously the older generations, but also to forge their own paths, you know. Um, and so there's much more that we could say about this, but
yeah. But I will have you back, Tim. And yeah, and I think like right now, I don't want to speak for my generation, but I
sure,
mean, your work has ushered in um arguing like even your work on limited intimacy, but beyond sexuality, it's in the title, is thinking outside of just needing a label. And I do think that my like generation right now, we're really torn between wait, like yes, there's so much work that's been done of coming out of the closet in terms of literary figures specifically, but just um, that we need to make this messy. Like we need to, not say that author's dead or that proclamation with, Roland Barthes. Um, but that, okay, well, the author's there, but how can we just play around? And it's why I like Jane Ward's work. Like, even though I don't agree with everything in not, what is it, not gay, sex
Not
between
get
straight white
right,
men,
right.
like, I question some of the methodology. I still think it's wonderful. And I love Jane Ward for actually putting it out there and, you know, taking a stand and making something creative and playful because at the end of the day, like you said, Tim, we are readers. Like we want something that also is suggestive and a proclamation. And, we don't have to buy every single idea. Like that's what makes
Sure.
something like when I'm questioned about, well, how about the women? That's exciting for me because it means, well, wait, like, there's something to my idea about what I'm thinking through around queer male bodies. Because then you wouldn't have asked that question.
Right,
So,
right. Well, and I think when you say, what do you say, keep it messy, or I think it's the messiness that is incredibly important not to lose sight of or clean up under whatever rubric, including the rubric of identity, which is always a way of cleaning up the mess and making the borders and the boundaries neat and firm and steady. One of my favorite lines from porn, there is an actor whose name maybe I never knew. If I knew it, I don't recall, but he always says, make it nasty, keep it messy, make it nasty. And there are worse mottos to have both for sex and for life than that.
yeah, yeah. Well, and because of my Virgo-ness, it could be messy and sexy and nasty, but then that bed sheet better go in the hamper. Okay. So Tim, this has just been wonderful. Oh, what are
my
you? Is there
and my part
anything?
my partner is a Virgo, so
Oh, so you know.
I know.
Um, we have our wild side, but it has to then be contained. Um, so is there anything right now, what should be on our radar? Is there something you're working on that you're excited about?
I think that there's so much we could continue talking about, Andrew, and I really enjoyed the conversation. I have a lot to say about what I'm working on because there are multiple projects. But I think we should end here, and I think you have some editing to do, you have some cleaning up to do, and I really enjoyed this conversation, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Yes, thank you, Tim. And I know that Tim's not on social media. No. So, but you all can find him on his university page, which is in the show notes, and send fan letters to Tim. I'm sure he would enjoy that. I'm excited to have you back I know you have a future project, so many projects. I'll have you back on. I can't wait to hear responses to this episode. And thank you so much, Tim. It's just been wonderful having this conversation, sharing space with you, and just getting to meet you.
Well, thank you, Andrew, for doing it. You're so good at this. As I said before we did this, I don't like Zoom. I don't like appearing on screen. I'm a little screen shy. Blah blah blah. But you are very good at this, and you have helped put me at my ease, and so I really appreciate that. And I hope your listeners get something out of it too.
Oh, they definitely will. And I think they have a lot to search on Google. So thank you, Tim, and bye to the listeners out there. And yeah, listen next week to, I'm sure, another riveting conversation. Okay, bye, Tim. Have a
Thank
great
you.
day.
Bye
Thank you
bye.
so
Bye bye.
much. Bye bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. This is Andrew Rimby, the host and director of the Ivory Tower Boiler Room podcast. I am joined with Mary DePippi, our chief contributor and host of True Crime in Academia. Please, if you're not, make sure that you follow the Ivory Tower Boiler Room and True Crime in Academia on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok too. Remember our TikTok? That's where all the exciting video clips are posted. Make sure that you join our Patreon if you want more Ivory Tower Boiler Room and True Crime in Academia content. All the video interviews are on our Patreon. All of our bonus episodes are on Patreon. And it just means so much for you to join for $5 a month. You unlock all of our bonus episodes. And also, it just helps support the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Thank you so much for giving Mary and I a needed jolt of caffeine for coffee. Thanks for the $5. Head to patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. We cannot wait for you all to listen to our summer season. There are so many exciting episodes. And we're also celebrating 3 years of the Ivory Tower Boiler Room podcast. So, without further ado, thanks for listening. Make sure you listen to the next episode next week and have a wonderful summer season, everyone. Okay, bye now.